You were born not just as a person, but as something divine. Before you even took your first breath, there was a quiet majesty inside you, a spark of infinite potential. But from the instant you opened your eyes, something else began to stir. Not within you, but around you. A system, carefully built, silently powerful. It didn't need to chain your body, it simply had to blur your memory. It didn't shout commands. It whispered them, disguised as culture, tradition, and truth. You weren't shackled by force. You were lulled by stories. The rules you never questioned. The beliefs you absorbed as if they were your own. The dreams handed to you like costumes, ready to wear but never truly yours. Little by little, that system reshaped your infinite essence into something small, obedient, manageable. And yet, haven't you always felt it? That quiet vibration behind your thoughts? That strange tension that you could never name, but always sensed? It's been there, pulsing just beneath the surface, like a distant memory you can almost remember but never quite reach. A silent whisper saying, "This isn't all there is. You're more than this." You were born as something vast, something cosmic, and deep down, some part of you has always known. This life? It's not what it seems. And you? You're far more than what you were told to be. This isn't another philosophy. This isn't another framework to adopt or a belief system to follow. No, this is a mirror. One that simply reflects back what you've always known but were taught to ignore. It doesn't aim to teach, it exists to remind. To pull back the veil and show you something ancient, something buried, something that was never truly lost. The divine force within you. You didn't just forget your power. You were trained to forget. Every institution you trusted, from the schools that shaped your thinking, to the media that narrated your world, to the religions that defined your soul, wasn't neutral. These systems weren't built to help you remember. They were designed to bury your light under layers of obedience, fear, and distraction. And the moment you learned to speak, the scripts began. Scripts about who you are, what you should want, what's possible, what isn't. You were given identities before you could explore your own. You were handed limits before you could even dream beyond them. And it wasn't because you were weak, it was because you were open, absorbing, curious. And they knew it. They saw the light in you before you did, and they feared it. So they told you stories. Stories that made you small. Stories that made you forget. And like a sponge, you took it all in. Not because you failed, but because you trusted. But the truth? It never left you. It was simply waiting, quietly, patiently, underneath all those layers, to be remembered again. From your very first steps into a classroom, the programming began. Quiet, methodical, disguised as education. They called it learning, but it was shaping. Not your mind at first, but your body. Sit still. Raise your hand. Ask permission before speaking. Don't speak unless called upon. These weren't just rules, they were rehearsals. Rehearsals for a life of compliance. Before you could even spell freedom, you were taught how to perform. Good behavior was rewarded. Gold stars, smiley faces, quiet praise. Disobedience? Marked, measured, corrected. And just like that, they had your nervous system under control. Then, and only then, did they start feeding your mind. What did they give you? History retold by the victors. Science stripped of spirit. Literature that mocked rebellion and glorified obedience. You were taught what to think, not how to think. You were encouraged to memorize, not to wonder. To conform, not to question. And the brilliance you were born with? Slowly paved over with standardized tests and approved answers. They didn't need force. They had structure. They didn't need cruelty. They had curriculum. And yet, somewhere inside, something pushed back. Some part of you that refused to disappear entirely. Maybe it was the question you weren't supposed to ask. Maybe it was the moment you paused, just before raising your hand. Maybe it was the story that made you feel uneasy when everyone else clapped. That was you. Still alive underneath the lessons. Still questioning. Still glowing. Think back to the lessons you were taught. The ones that weren't written in books but etched into behavior. Follow the rules. Respect authority. Be realistic. Don't ask too many questions. Don't dream too big. On the surface, they seemed harmless. But in truth, they were architectural blueprints. Not for your growth, but for your containment. These rules shaped more than your behavior. They shaped your beliefs, your sense of self, your perception of what's possible. They wrapped around you like invisible scaffolding, making you think the structure was you. But it wasn't. It was a cage. And here's the part that hurts the most. The people who passed these lessons to you weren't your enemies. They were your parents, your teachers, the ones who loved you most. They didn't mean to clip your wings. They simply didn't know theirs had been clipped too. They believed the same scripts. They played by the same rules. They were trapped inside the same system, and they passed it down without even realizing. It wasn't cruelty. It was conditioning. Generation after generation, the programming replicated itself like an echo through time. And you? You inherited not just their love, but their limitations. Not just their hopes, but their blind spots. And so you lived inside a life shaped by other people's fears. You wore it like it was yours. Until something inside you whispered, "This doesn't fit." That whisper wasn't rebellion. It was remembrance. It's not their fault. And it's not yours either. But now that you've seen it, really seen it, it becomes your responsibility. Because the moment awareness enters, the illusion begins to crumble. The story unravels. The spell breaks. You start to realize something subtle but life-altering. You've been living out someone else's idea of a life. Wearing identities that never quite fit. Chasing goals that were never really yours. Measuring your worth with rulers designed by strangers. And all the while, something deep inside has been whispering the same quiet message. This isn't it. There's more. That whisper isn't fantasy. It's memory. A soft recall from a place before you forgot. It's the echo of the infinite within you, waiting for you to listen again. The pain you feel when you see the truth isn't a flaw. It's proof. Proof that your soul is still alive, still sensitive, still willing to remember. That ache? It means you've begun. And in that recognition, a new power emerges. Not loud or dramatic, but steady and grounded. You begin to untangle yourself from the stories you were given. You stop apologizing for feeling like you don't belong. Because now you understand why. You never really fit. Because you weren't made to fit. You were made to remember. You were made to break the cycle. And now you're starting to. That whisper, that subtle tug at your heart, it's not imagination. It's ancient code. Something buried in your DNA long before you ever had a name or a nationality or a job title. It's older than every system you were taught to trust. And it doesn't need proof. It is the proof. Long before modern society reduced the soul to superstition, ancient civilizations understood something sacred. The Egyptians spoke of Nida, not a god above, but a divine principle woven into everything, including you. The Vedic sages called it Atman, the self that is not separate from Brahman, the infinite. These weren't myths. They were maps. Guides for remembering who and what you truly are. But over time, those maps were taken, redrawn, and repackaged as metaphor. What was once seen as real became dismissed as mysticism. Because if you remembered your own godhood, the entire illusion of control would fall apart. You were never meant to bow to a system. You were meant to stand with the stars. And that ancient knowing inside you? It never died. It only dimmed, buried under obedience and distraction. But now, as you peel back the layers, it begins to stir again. Like embers under ash, it waits for breath, for presence, for truth. The world told you your spark was silly, dangerous, childish. But ancient wisdom tells a different story. You were not meant to follow the path. You were meant to remember the fire. But the modern world? It doesn't want you to remember. It doesn't want you to even look. It wants you distracted, busy, skeptical, logical, anything but awakened. So those ancient truths? They were pushed aside. Labeled as fantasy. Rewritten as allegory. Hidden in plain sight, right where no one would ever think to look, inside you. Because the moment you remember who you are, the whole game changes. You stop playing by their rules. You stop asking permission. You stop consuming just to feel something. You begin to see clearly, and clarity is dangerous to a system built on confusion. And so, The truths that could have set you free were excluded from your curriculum, scrubbed from the mainstream, dismissed by those who fear their power. Because if you knew what you truly are, limitless, divine, sovereign, then obedience would collapse. The entire control grid would dissolve. They don't need you to be chained. They just need you to stay asleep. But some truths are too real to suppress forever. They echo through dreams, through longing, through the moments when life feels almost, but not quite, right. Those are cracks in the system, glimpses of what lies beyond. And now you're seeing one. This is not the end of your programming. It's the beginning of your remembering. And once you remember, you don't go back. When people wake up, truly wake up, they stop following the script. They stop buying into illusions that once shaped their every move. They no longer chase approval, validation, or artificial dreams. Because when you remember your true nature, you stop needing permission to exist. And that's what the system fears most. Because awakened people don't make obedient workers. They don't numb themselves with distractions. They don't fight over crumbs when they realize they're made of stars. They stop playing the game. And when enough people stop playing, the game collapses. That's why this knowledge isn't trending on social media. That's why your school never taught you that consciousness is not just something you have, it's what you are. That's why the mainstream ignores every whisper that leads you inward. But here's the beautiful irony. Truth spreads quietly. It moves through whispers, not broadcasts. Through resonance, not volume. And when someone remembers, they can't help but light the way for others. Because remembering is contagious. It's a frequency. And once you tune into it, everything changes. You start to see the patterns. You hear the hum beneath the noise. You feel the power inside the stillness. And in that silence, you realize the revolution was never outside of you. It was always within. You don't need to be told who you are anymore. You already know. You just forgot for a little while. You weren't born to pay bills and follow orders. That was never the assignment. You were born encoded with something sacred, something infinite. This isn't spiritual poetry. It's physics. It's energy. It's the truth that every ancient mystic and modern quantum physicist is beginning to agree on. Consciousness isn't something you possess. It's what you are. You're not a being with a soul. You are the soul. The awareness. The spark of life animating this experience. This body? It's the lens. This world? The canvas. You are the artist, the observer, the creator. And once you see yourself that way, not as a product of society, not as a role to perform, but as a spark of divinity walking through form, something fundamental shifts. Your choices change. Your energy shifts. Your very presence becomes different. You stop shrinking to fit expectations. You expand to meet your purpose. But awareness alone is not enough. You must unlearn everything that told you otherwise. Every subtle message that whispered you were just human. Every system that reduced your vastness into data, statistics, and labels. Those lies were never yours to begin with. So now the real work begins. The sacred unraveling. The gentle demolition of false identity. The rebuilding of truth from the inside out. Because you're not here to be asleep in a dream someone else wrote. You're here to wake up and remember you were always divine. But knowing isn't enough. You can't just awaken intellectually and expect the transformation to be complete. You have to unlearn, deeply, deliberately, even painfully. You have to dismantle every false identity you've worn just to be accepted. The titles, the expectations, the silent agreements you made to belong in a world that was never built for your truth. This isn't about rebellion. It's about reclamation. It's not always beautiful. It's not all affirmations and incense and light. Sometimes it's messy, but exhausting. It's spiritual warfare, not against others, but against the noise in your own mind. The echoes of limitation. The voices that sound like your own but were planted there by culture, by shame, by fear. And yet, through that chaos, there's something sacred happening. Each layer you peel away reveals more of who you were before the world told you who to be. Every discomfort is an invitation. Every challenge, a doorway. This process is not for the faint of heart. But neither is awakening. It requires courage, not comfort. It asks for truth, not trends. And most of all, it demands presence, the willingness to sit with what you find when the noise fades. Because the system wasn't built to set you free. It was built to keep you asleep. And the only way out is in. If there's one part of your body they fear you understanding, it's the pineal gland. That tiny, pine cone-shaped structure in the very center of your brain isn't just biological, it's mystical. Ancient civilizations called it the third eye. The Egyptians carved it into their temples. Eastern traditions built entire systems around its activation. Descartes even called it the seat of the soul. So why does modern medicine treat it like an afterthought? Because when it awakens, you awaken. And an awakened you is harder to distract, harder to deceive, harder to control. Instead of celebrating it, they've quietly attacked it. Systematically, chemically, consistently. Look around. Fluoride in the water, glyphosate in the food, microplastics in the blood, heavy metals in the air. Coincidence? All these substances share one terrifying effect. They accumulate in the pineal gland. They calcify it. They silence the gateway. And it's not a theory. It's documented, peer-reviewed, proven, but strangely ignored. Because if people understood this war on perception, if they truly knew how their very sense of reality was being numbed, they might start asking questions. Dangerous questions. Life-altering questions. The pineal gland isn't just about sleep. It's about sight. Not the kind with eyes, but the kind with soul. When active, it becomes a transceiver, receiving and transmitting subtle frequencies, tuning you into intuition, inner knowing, expanded awareness. And when it's shut down, you still function, but not fully. You still live, but not awakened. That's how they win, not with violence, but with slow, invisible sabotage. They don't need to silence your voice. They just need to dull your perception. Over time, the world becomes noisier, but your intuition grows quieter. And you don't even realize it's happening. You think you're choosing your breakfast cereal, but you're being steered. You think it's just toothpaste, but it's another dose of fluoride. You think the fog in your head is stress, but it's sedation, layer by layer, year after year. And one day, you stop asking questions. You stop noticing. You stop remembering. But the truth never dies. Even under layers of programming and pollution, something still pulses in you. The whisper hasn't vanished. It's just been buried. You feel it sometimes, don't you? That strange sensation that you're meant for more? That reality is wider, deeper, stranger than what you've been shown? That's your third eye, still alive, still trying to break through. It's not dead. It's dormant. And the very fact that it's been targeted so precisely should tell you how powerful it really is. Reclaiming it doesn't require superstition. It requires intention. It starts with removing the poisons, yes. But more importantly, it starts with remembering who you are. Reconnecting the signal. Choosing clarity over comfort. Truth over convenience. Because when your perception sharpens, everything changes. The world doesn't shrink, it expands. And suddenly, what once felt like a trap becomes a threshold. You don't need psychedelics to see the truth. You don't need to escape your body or leave the planet. You need clarity. You need detox. You need discipline. And above all, you need to want the truth more than you want to be comfortable. Because waking up isn't gentle. It's not easy. It's not always beautiful. But it's real, and real is what sets you free. The deeper you go into this process, the more obvious it becomes. This isn't just about fluoride in your water or lies in your textbooks. It's not only about corrupt governments, media manipulation, or corporate greed. Those are just the surface symptoms. Beneath them all is something older. Something that doesn't wear a suit or hold a political office. Something that doesn't need to be voted in because it operates behind the scenes, through frequency, through thought, through emotion. You begin to realize you're not just living in a broken system. You're living in a spiritual battlefield. And most people don't even know there's a war going on. That's how powerful the control is, subtle enough to remain unseen, effective enough to be almost total. Because if you can convince a soul that nothing is wrong, you don't need to fight it. You just let it sleep. But you're not asleep anymore. You're beginning to feel the edges of something hidden. A truth that rattles the cage. That opens the eyes. That pulls the mask away. Ancient Gnostic texts warned of beings called archons, not physical creatures, but energetic parasites. They don't appear in shadows or wear cloaks. They don't haunt your dreams like monsters. They infiltrate much more subtly, through systems, through thoughts, through emotion. And you felt them. That voice that tells you to stay quiet when you want to speak your truth. That sudden wave of anxiety when you begin to break free. That sharp stab of fear when you even consider standing out, shining, or being different. Those feelings? They aren't always you. That's not superstition. That's frequency. You've been told your mind is just neurons and sparks. That your consciousness is local, limited to your brain. But that's a lie. Consciousness is the source, not the byproduct. And just like a radio can pick up static or distortion, your mind can pick up signals that don't belong to you. Low-frequency entities feed on chaos, fear, shame, division. They don't want to possess you, they want to drain you. Because when you're fragmented, distracted, and ashamed, you leak energy. And that energy is what they feast on. So how do they keep you fragmented? Through the structures you trust. Media feeds you fear. Religion sells you separation. Education rewards obedience and punishes wonder. Each of these becomes a delivery system, not just for ideas, but for energy manipulation. It's not about fiction. It's not about mythology. It's about how energy moves. And once you see the pattern, you can no longer pretend it isn't there. These parasitic forces don't need to break into your life. They were embedded in its structure from the start. The media doesn't just report tragedy, it saturates your nervous system with chaos. Not to inform, but to condition. To numb. To overload. Religion, for many, teaches fear cloaked as devotion. It tells you salvation lies in something far away, something external. It separates you from the divine within you and replaces it with guilt and dependency. Education? It punishes the creative, praises the obedient. It molds children into answer machines. It doesn't reward exploration, it rewards repetition. Over time, you stop asking questions. You stop daydreaming. You forget what it feels like to be wildly curious. These systems weren't hijacked, they were designed this way. Designed not for your evolution, but for your containment. And at their root, they are gateways, portals for energetic parasitism. Not everyone who works within them is malicious. Most are unaware. But the design? It's intentional. The archonic forces don't run the show directly. But they whisper to those who do. They don't need to be visible to be influential. They operate like code, embedded, unseen, yet deeply effective. And what do they fear most? A population that breathes deeply, that meditates, that thinks critically, that questions systems, that remembers its origin. They fear a humanity that no longer reacts, but observes, because observation breaks the spell. They don't want a world full of mindful, awake, curious beings. They want a species that's reactive, exhausted, overstimulated, so caught up in notifications, schedules, and survival that it forgets its light. That's the strategy. And it works. You scroll to escape, not to discover. You consume media not for truth, but for noise. Every second, your attention is harvested, not by accident, but by design. Because as long as you're reacting, you're not remembering. As long as you're stimulated, you're not still. And stillness is where you find the truth. You may think this sounds far-fetched, exaggerated, or too mystical. But look around. Why is it that nearly every part of modern life seems designed to disconnect you from yourself? Why are substances that expand your awareness banned, while those that dull it are sold on every street corner? Why are ancient practices mocked, sacred symbols buried, and inner truth dismissed as woo-woo? It's not because they don't work. It's because they do. Because once you begin to remember what you truly are, not your name, not your job, not your story, you unplug from their power grid. You stop feeding fear. You stop reacting to control. And in that still space, something new emerges. Presence. The kind of presence that doesn't need validation. The kind that observes instead of obeys. The kind that makes invisible systems tremble, not through rage but through clarity. Because once you see the pattern, you can no longer be part of it. This isn't about rebellion. This isn't about war, not in the way you've been taught. This is spiritual warfare. And in this war, awareness is the only weapon that truly works. Not belief, not defiance, but awareness. Because once you're aware, their grip weakens. Not because you fight harder, but because you stop being food. The archons, these energetic parasites, don't thrive on power. They thrive on forgetfulness, on distraction, on self-doubt. Their greatest victory was never control. It was invisibility. They convinced you they didn't exist while operating through every fear you carry. But now, the illusion is cracking. You're seeing the pattern. And once seen, it can't be unseen. That's sovereignty. Not a battle cry, but a calm, clear gaze. The kind that doesn't get pulled into emotional storms. The kind that watches, not reacts. And that clarity? That's your shield. Your sword. Your freedom. You don't need to become someone new. You need to remember who you've always been. Not the identity layered onto you, but the awareness beneath it. That still presence behind the thoughts, the feelings, the stories. That part of you that just watches. And when you live from that place, not reacting, not grasping, just being, the entire illusion starts to fall apart. The control systems lose their fuel. Fear loses its grip. And what's left is something they can't touch, your presence. The archons don't win through violence. They win through confusion, through masks, through the subtle lie that the version of you the world sees is you. And the more you believe in that mask, the easier you are to guide, to bend, to extract energy from. They didn't need to cage your body. They just had to convince you that the cage was you. You were born as pure awareness, limitless, formless, free. But slowly, layer by layer, they wrapped you in identity. A name, a gender, a nationality, a religion, a role. And you believed it, not because you were weak, but because they started early. Before you even knew what belief was, you began to equate performance with worth. You learned what parts of yourself were acceptable and which had to be buried. You edited yourself to survive. And after a while, you forgot you were editing. You stopped being. You started performing. And the system? It loves performers. It thrives when obedience is mistaken for morality. When self-worth is measured by productivity. When identity becomes currency and truth becomes irrelevant. But something in you has always felt the friction. That discomfort, that subtle ache, that wasn't dysfunction. That was divinity, pushing back. You weren't made to fit this mold. You were made to remember that you never needed it in the first place. This identity, this costume of beliefs, roles, and expectations, it's not your fault. But it is your responsibility to question it. Because most of what you think is you is just borrowed programming. Bits and pieces of what others found acceptable. Scripts you inherited, not truths you discovered. You were praised for being agreeable, rewarded for staying quiet. You learned, consciously or not, which parts of your soul needed to be hidden in order to be loved, accepted, included. And you complied, not because you were broken, but because you were human. You edited yourself to survive. And over time, you forgot you were editing. That's how the mask became your face. That's how the performance became the person. Every interaction became a rehearsal. Every relationship, a negotiation of masks. And deep in the background, your soul, the real you, grew quiet. Not dead. Just waiting. Waiting for you to notice the exhaustion. Not just physical, but existential. The weight of maintaining a self that isn't real. That's why so many people feel tired and don't know why. It's not just their job or their stress. It's the energy drain of pretending. The system thrives when you confuse your role with your reality. But the moment you begin to notice the dissonance, the crack between who you are and who you perform to be, that's when the real you starts to come alive. Not to improve the mask, but to finally drop it. Reclaiming your true self isn't about fixing the mask. It's about dropping it entirely. It's not about becoming better, more polished, or more acceptable. It's about becoming real, becoming whole. And that means allowing yourself to be raw, unfiltered, contradictory, even messy. It means realizing you don't need to be perfect to be present. You don't need to be liked to be true. You don't need to meet anyone's expectations to belong to yourself. This awakening doesn't require a grand transformation. It requires honesty. It means letting go of who you think you need to be in order to be loved, and standing instead as what you actually are. Infinite awareness, having a temporary experience as a human being. Not to transcend life, but to live it fully, authentically, without illusion. You were never meant to fit inside this system. That constant friction you feel, that discomfort in your bones, that restlessness in your spirit, that's not dysfunction. That's divinity rejecting limitation. That's your soul remembering. Because the roles you've been assigned, citizen, consumer, follower, provider, they were never built to hold your truth. They're not evil, but they're too small, too shallow, too temporary for something as vast as you. And truth doesn't need approval. It just needs space. It doesn't ask for applause. It simply wants to be. And when you give it room, everything false starts to fall away. You are not here to escape life. You're here to live it, fully, awake, without illusion. You are not here to climb someone else's ladder or play by someone else's rules. You're here to be, to remember, and to reclaim. And that memory doesn't come from adding more. It comes from subtracting, stripping away the noise, the roles, the programming, until what's left is simple, silent, and true. You are not a name. You are not a personality. You are not your pain, your preferences, or even your past. You are awareness itself, watching, sensing, flowing through this moment. And in that recognition, you don't lose yourself. You find yourself, not as a fixed identity, but as the presence that sees. This isn't a belief. It's a seeing, remembering, a knowing beyond thought. The world will keep trying to define you, to label you, to box you up in neat, digestible terms. But the truth doesn't need to fit on a resume or a bio. It doesn't need a category. It's vast, fluid, uncontainable. That's what you are. And when you stop mistaking your temporary costume for your eternal self, the illusion starts to dissolve. Not because you ran from it, but because you saw through it. And what's left when the mask drops? Silence. Power. The kind that cannot be manipulated, because it no longer needs to be anything other than what it already is. The system wants you curated, predictable, contained. That's why it encourages you to define yourself constantly. Choose a label, write a bio, update your profile, build a brand, reinforce it every day, make it believable, make it consistent. But all of that is distraction. Because as long as you're busy being someone, you're not asking the only question that matters. Who's watching all this? Who is the one behind the thoughts, behind the roles, behind the ever-shifting feelings? That silent witness, that calm observer, that's the real you. Not the character, not the costume, not the identity, but the consciousness behind it all. And that's the part the system can't touch. It can manipulate your image, your story, your habits, but it can't reach what watches. Because that presence doesn't operate from fear or lack or survival. It doesn't react. It doesn't grasp. It simply is. But here's the thing, that presence has been buried. Not destroyed, just forgotten. Under layers of expectation. Under pressure to perform, to prove, to perfect. And the deeper the persona goes, the more effort it takes to maintain it. That's why you feel so tired. That's why even success feels hollow. Because the performance demands energy. Constantly. And the soul? It grows quiet. But not forever. The moment you stop clinging to identity and start being, you begin to breathe again. You begin to feel again. You begin to return. Not to a version of yourself, but to what was always watching from within. The deeper your persona goes, the heavier it gets. It's not just about pretending to be someone, it's about the energy it takes to maintain the act. Every interaction becomes a performance. Every relationship, a subtle negotiation. And slowly, the soul fades into the background. Not because it's gone, but because it's been overshadowed. You start to feel it as fatigue, as numbness, as a quiet ache that doesn't go away, no matter how much you rest or distract yourself. It's not your schedule. It's not just your stress. It's the burden of pretending to be okay, pretending to be successful, pretending to be who you think the world wants. And all the while, your real self, unpolished, alive, contradictory, is waiting, not to be perfected, but to be seen, to be felt, to be allowed. That's what reclaiming your true self really is. Not fixing the mask, not improving the performance, but dropping the script altogether, letting yourself speak when it's inconvenient, cry when it's uncomfortable, laugh when it makes no sense, love without strategy, exist without defense. Because you weren't born to win an image contest. You were born to be real. And in a world that teaches performance, authenticity becomes rebellion, presence becomes power, and your truth, no matter how messy or raw, becomes medicine for you and for others. Not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. You were never meant to fit into this system. That uncomfortable feeling you carry, the quiet dissonance, the constant inner resistance, it's not dysfunction. It's your divinity. It's the sacred signal that the roles you've played were never built to hold your truth. And the truth? It doesn't need a title. It doesn't crave applause. It doesn't even need to be understood. It just wants space. Space to breathe. Space to be remembered. You don't have to transcend the world. You don't have to run away to a mountaintop or retreat into silence forever. You just have to stop mistaking the mask for the master. Let the persona go. Let go of the voice that says you need to be more. Let go of the pressure to be palatable. Let go of the habit of shrinking yourself to fit in someone else's frame. Because underneath the performance, the polish, the protection, there is something deeper. A presence, a stillness, a flame. And that flame doesn't need fixing. It needs remembering. It needs you to stop looking out there and begin returning in here. To the place you never truly left, only forgot. To the you that existed before the world taught you to act. You're not here to impress. You're here to express. Not to become something, but to remember what you've always been. And in that remembering, everything false falls away. What remains is real. What's left, after the masks fall, after the noise fades, is what was always real. But here's the paradox. Spiritual awakening doesn't start in the sky. It doesn't begin with abstract thought or cosmic insight. It begins where no one expects it, in your body. That might sound strange when everything you've been taught about awakening points upward, toward the mind, toward the crown, toward ideas, meditation, philosophy. But the body is not separate from the soul. It is the soul condensed into matter, a vessel of light, a temple of energy. And the system knows this. That's why it doesn't just target your mind. It targets your biology. If they can keep your body numb, inflamed, disconnected, your thoughts don't matter. They've already won before the first idea appears. Think about how you've been conditioned to view your body as a machine, a burden, something to push, punish, decorate, or fix, but never something sacred, never something intelligent. Yet every ancient tradition saw it differently. In Egypt, in India, in China, the body wasn't a barrier to enlightenment. It was the path. Every breath, every heartbeat, every cell was part of a divine instrument, attuned not only to the physical world but to realms beyond the senses. And for centuries, you've been taught to ignore it. Start with the gut, not your mind, not your beliefs. Start with the second brain, your digestive system. Most people don't realize this, but your gut produces more neurotransmitters than your brain. It regulates your mood, your energy, even your intuition. It's not just about digestion. It's about perception, but it's under constant attack. Pesticides, antibiotics, processed food, synthetic additives, these aren't just nutritional concerns. They are weapons against awareness. Because when your gut is inflamed, your thoughts are foggy. When your microbiome is damaged, your ability to feel clearly is compromised. And they know this. That's why the food system is engineered the way it is, not to nourish, but to numb. They don't want you sharp, grounded, and intuitive. They want you bloated, distracted, and emotionally volatile. and they've built an entire industry around it. Think about it. When your gut is calm, your mind is clear. When your digestion is balanced, your emotions stabilize. That's not coincidence. That's coherence. A body in harmony supports a mind in clarity. But when you're inflamed, when your system is overloaded with toxins and your nervous system is in overdrive, awakening feels impossible. Not because you're not ready, but because your instrument is out of tune. Your body is not the problem. It's the portal. And once you begin to care for it as such, the fog begins to lift. But it's not just the food. It's the water, the air, the light. Every element that should nourish your body has been quietly weaponized to drain it. Tap water, saturated with endocrine disruptors. Air filled with industrial toxins. Artificial light that scrambles your circadian rhythm and bleeds your vitality. It's not always loud. It's not always obvious. But it's relentless. And through it all, you're told to adapt. To push through. To caffeinate, medicate, and carry on. And when your body begins to break down, you're handed pills instead of answers. Diagnoses instead of truth. No one asks the deeper question, what are you feeding the instrument of your divinity? Because they don't profit from your clarity. They profit from your chaos. And the more inflamed, exhausted, and disconnected you become, the easier you are to control. But here's the truth no one tells you. Healing your body is not just a wellness trend. It's an act of rebellion. Because a clean, energized body isn't just healthier, it's harder to manipulate. A nervous system that's regulated, a gut that's calm, a brain that's clear. These aren't luxuries. They're weapons of liberation. You can't rise into your full awareness if your cells are drowning in toxicity. You can't remember who you are when your body is in constant survival mode. Liberation isn't just mental. It's cellular. And here's the breakthrough that changes everything. Your body wants to wake up. It's not fighting against you, it's fighting for you. Always communicating, always recalibrating, always reaching for balance, even when you ignore it. It doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be supported. When you give it even half a chance, nutrients, movement, breath, stillness, it responds. It shifts. It clears. And suddenly, what once felt impossible starts to feel natural. Your thoughts sharpen. Your emotions stabilize. Your intuition strengthens. That's not a coincidence. That's coherence, the state where your mind, body, and spirit stop pulling in different directions and begin to move as one unified field. And when that happens, something fundamental shifts. Awareness stops being a concept. It becomes your baseline. You're no longer thinking about awakening. You're living it. In your breath. In your skin. In the way you sit, move, speak, and feel. And most spiritual teachings miss this. They tell you to meditate while ignoring what you eat. They teach transcendence while you scroll until your dopamine is drained. They skip over the body, as if enlightenment floats above your skin rather than rises from within it. But you can't bypass embodiment. You live in this vessel. It's not in the way. It is the way. This is embodiment, not the aesthetic version made for social media, but the kind that rewires your nervous system and clears the fog from your perception. Because the divine doesn't just live in the sky. It doesn't only whisper from scriptures or descend through visions. It lives in your blood, in your bones, in your breath. And you don't have to chase it. You just have to clean the vessel it's been trying to move through all along. Start with your breath. Breath isn't just air. It's a code. Every inhale is an entry point. Every exhale is a release. It's the most underestimated force in your spiritual toolkit and the most accessible. No candles, no chants, no guru required. But here's the irony. While the world trains you to look outward for salvation, your breath has been holding the key to liberation all along. You just forgot how to use it. You breathe on autopilot. But you were never meant to breathe unconsciously. The ancients knew this. They built entire systems around breath, not for relaxation, but for transformation. Because breath is life force. Breath is presence. Breath is power. You don't need to escape to find yourself. You need to return. To your lungs. To your rhythm. To the inhale you've ignored and the exhale you've suppressed. It's always been here. waiting. In Vedic teachings, the breath is prana, life force, the bridge between the physical and the subtle. In Taoist alchemy, it circulates qi, activating the body's internal elixir. In Hermetic tradition, the breath is the rhythm of spirit animating matter. Every ancient path, Egyptian, Hindu, Buddhist, Gnostic, understood one thing: control your breath, and you control your state of consciousness. And if you can shift your state of consciousness, you can remember what you truly are. But modern life has cut you off from this truth. Fast-paced living, chronic stress, screens and endless stimulation. You've been trained to breathe shallowly, from your chest, not your belly. To survive, not to feel. To keep going, not to be. This isn't just a physical habit. It's spiritual suffocation. When you breathe like that, your energy body begins to close. Your frequency short-circuits. You stay stuck in thought loops, emotional spirals, confusion. Not because you're broken, but because your system is starving for breath. Because breath doesn't just move oxygen. It moves energy. It opens channels. It clears the static that builds up from suppressed feelings, unspoken truths, forgotten pain. And when you breathe consciously, with rhythm, depth, presence, you're not just relaxing. You're remembering. You're coming home to the temple you live inside. That's not woo. That's physics. That's embodiment. You think you're just tired, or anxious, or disconnected. But often, what you're feeling isn't emotional, it's energetic. It's not that something is wrong with you. It's that something inside you wants to move. Trauma. Fear. Suppressed emotions. These don't vanish when ignored. They lodge in your energy field like static in a signal. The longer they stay unprocessed, the more they distort your perception. You're not broken, you're congested. And this is where breath becomes more than just healing. It becomes medicine. Conscious breathing, with rhythm, presence, and intention, starts to clear the blockages. You begin to feel warmth, tingling, movement. Sometimes you cry, sometimes you shake, sometimes you laugh. But it's not random. It's release. Not from outside in, but inside out. Not because something new entered you, but because what was never meant to stay is finally leaving. As the channels open, something ancient stirs. At the base of your spine lies dormant intelligence, the raw, spiraling current yogis call Kundalini. It's not mythology. It's electricity. It's life force. It's you, waking up from the inside. And no, it doesn't need permission. Just space. Just breath. The system never taught you this because an awakened body is ungovernable. A clear energy field doesn't react on command. It responds from knowing. That's why breath has been hidden in plain sight. Quiet, simple, powerful. Kundalini isn't a metaphor. It's alive. It's the raw current of your own divinity, coiled like potential at the base of your spine, waiting for you to give it space. Not permission, space. It doesn't rise through belief or intellectual understanding. It rises through embodiment, through conscious breath, through stillness, through energy that is finally allowed to flow. This isn't about fireworks or fantasies. Sometimes it's subtle, a warmth at your core, a shift in your posture, a silence in your mind that wasn't there before. But make no mistake, it's real. And it's yours. The system doesn't want you to know this because you'd stop outsourcing your power. You wouldn't need permission from teachers or institutions. You wouldn't seek validation through rituals or titles. You'd remember. You'd become your own healer, your own compass, your own connection to the divine. And that's dangerous to them, because an awakened individual doesn't just consume, they create. Doesn't just obey, they observe. Doesn't just cope, they transform. You don't need complex rituals or spiritual theatrics to begin. You need presence. You need courage. The courage to feel, to sit with discomfort, to breathe through it instead of pushing it away. Because real breath work doesn't just bring bliss, it brings truth. And truth doesn't always feel pretty, but it always sets you free. You've been told awakening is all light and love, blissful meditations, serene smiles. But real awakening? It's raw. It's disruptive. It brings up everything the system trained you to bury. Grief, rage, ecstasy, guilt, desire, food. All of it comes to the surface. Not to punish you, but to purify you. Because what you don't feel, you can't release. And what you don't release, you carry. Sometimes for decades. Sometimes for lifetimes. That's why conscious breath is a spiritual scalpel. It cuts through the noise. It bypasses the mental stories. It goes straight to the stuck energy and says, let's move this. And in that movement, you meet parts of yourself you forgot. Not imagined pieces, exiled ones. The child who wasn't allowed to cry. The artist who learned to stay silent. The spirit who was told it was too much, too loud, too wild. You feel it all. And it hurts. And it heals. Because healing isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about remembering what's real. What was always real, beneath the performance. So don't fear the shaking, the sweating, the emotional waves. That's not dysfunction. That's release. You're not falling apart. You're falling back into yourself. And when that process completes, you don't just believe you're divine. You feel it. In your bones. You are not here to survive life. You are here to live it. Fully. Fiercely. Freely. Not from your conditioning, but from your source. And that shift doesn't happen in theory. It happens through experience. Through breath. Through body. Through presence. Because when you stop outsourcing your healing to someone else's hands, when you stop waiting for permission to feel, when you stop needing a map to walk your own path, that's when the remembering begins. The breath becomes your teacher. The body becomes your compass. The present moment becomes your altar. And slowly what used to feel foreign, stillness, clarity, alignment, starts to feel familiar. Not because it's new, but because it's you. The real you. The one that never left, only waited beneath the noise. This is why breath is sacred. It's not just a function. It's a strategy. It's not just biology. It's spiritual technology. Available in every moment. Unbranded. Undivided. Yours. No doctrine. No hierarchy. No cost. Just awareness. And that's exactly why the system doesn't teach it. Because the moment you remember this, you stop being a dependent consumer of solutions. You become your own medicine. Your own guru. Your own liberation. It doesn't start with grand gestures. It starts here. Close your eyes. Inhale fully. Exhale slowly. Fin. Not as a technique. As a remembering. You don't need to be hypnotized in a theater to live in a trance. You already are. Most people walk through life like actors who forgot they were acting. Locked into routines so rehearsed, they feel like truth. Wake up. React. Sit. Repeat. It doesn't look dangerous. It doesn't feel dramatic. That's why it works. This is the genius of the system. It doesn't enslave through force. It controls through repetition. Not with chains. With habits. You think you're living your life, making choices. But in reality, you're often just replaying a script you never wrote. A character built by culture, sculpted by advertising, molded by trauma, and reinforced by the lie that this is just how it is. It's not just a habit. It's hypnosis. And the most dangerous part? It's disguised as normal, as harmless, as responsible adulthood. You adapt to a rhythm that numbs you. You call burnout ambition. You call anxiety momentum. You call distraction entertainment. But deep down, you know something is off. The question is, are you brave enough to pause the pattern? To step outside the rehearsal and feel what's real? Because the moment you do, even briefly, the trance begins to crack. And what leaks through isn't new, it's ancient. It's been with you all along. Culture isn't just entertainment. It's programming. It's the delivery system for belief. And if you don't consciously choose what you consume, it begins to consume you. Every ad you scroll past, every show you binge, every headline you read. It's not neutral. It's not passive. It's a language, a frequency, a spell. And over time, it teaches you how to think, what to want, who to be. It writes your lines before you even realize you're reciting them. That's how the system sustains itself. It doesn't need to invade your home. It's already in your pocket, in your habits, in your taste, in your mind. You think you're free because you can choose between brands, between platforms, between identities. But those choices are all inside the same maze. The only true freedom is stepping outside of it. Not in rebellion, but in remembrance. Remembrance that you were not born to perform. You were born to be. You were not born to obey. You were born to observe. You were not born to consume. You were born to create. And the moment you start choosing your inputs consciously, what you watch, what you eat, what you breathe, what you believe, everything changes. Because then the spell breaks, and you stop being a product of your culture, and start becoming a creator of reality. The system isn't made of metal or walls, it's made of rhythms, traditions, words, patterns so familiar you don't even notice them. But everything from your morning alarm to your national holidays has been shaped, not by nature, but by design. Take the school bell. You thought it was just a time signal, but it was Pavlovian programming. Like ringing a bell to make a dog salivate, the bell made you move, sit, stand, eat, obey, without question. Not because you chose to, because you were trained to. And it didn't end at graduation. Now, the bells are digital. Your alarm clock, your phone pings, your notification sounds. They keep you reactive, externally focused, internally absent. That's not random. That's engineering. The more distracted you are, the less you ask, is any of this even mine? Even holidays, what should be celebrations of love and joy, have become rituals of stress and performance. You're told to spend, to smile, to conform. And if you don't, you're labeled cold, ungrateful, or rebellious. Christmas wrapped in consumerism. Valentine's Day selling conditional love. Halloween celebrating masks. But the real mask is pretending it all still feels sacred. These aren't celebrations anymore. They're scripts. Perform. Smile. Repeat. Not because you believe, but because you were taught it means belonging. But what if you could belong without betraying yourself? You were taught that holidays were sacred. But what's sacred about exhaustion? About debt? About pretending? Look deeper. These days have become rituals of distraction, ceremonies where you're expected to perform happiness, spend money, post the highlight reel, and call it connection. You gather not to feel, but to prove. Smile for the camera. Show up for appearances. Buy the right gifts. Post the right message. And if you don't, you're the problem. The outsider. The one who doesn't care. But what if you're not disconnected? What if you're just awake? Because when tradition becomes obligation and celebration becomes performance, you're no longer participating, you're complying. You weren't born to keep up appearances. You were born to be present. And presence doesn't need a calendar. It doesn't need decorations. It doesn't need approval. It just needs truth. You can still show up. You can still share moments with those you love. But do it from awareness, not autopilot. Do it because it's real, not because it's required. And that shift? That's what the system fears most. Not rebellion, not resistance, but non-participation in the trance. Because when you stop performing for invisible judges, when you stop chasing approval through rituals that drain you, you reclaim something they can't sell you, presence. Even language is part of the trance. The words you speak don't just describe your world, they shape it. Phrases like, "That's just how it is," or "You've got to be realistic," they sound innocent. But they're spells. Tiny agreements you repeat without thinking, and each time you say them, the cage gets stronger. Limitation becomes normal. Settling becomes wisdom. You mistake conformity for clarity. But stop and ask, whose words are these? Did you choose them, or did you inherit them from people who never question them either? Your language reveals your programming. That's why waking up isn't just about changing your mind, it's about reclaiming your voice. Notice what you say in passing. Catch the phrases you echo. Ask yourself, do these words expand me or shrink me? Because once you speak from truth, not tradition, your reality shifts. Words become tools, not traps. They create instead of confine. And this isn't just personal. It's cultural. Corporate rituals, workplace jargon, morning huddles, performance reviews, these aren't neutral. They're designed to keep you tired enough to comply but productive enough to continue. Hustle becomes holy. Burnout becomes a badge. But these aren't paths to purpose. They're distraction loops. You weren't born to repeat empty phrases or chase endless goals. You were born to create meaning, not be measured by metrics. Let's talk about the corporate rituals. The meetings, the metrics, the morning grind dressed up as meaning. You were taught that success means structure. That productivity is virtue. That endless busyness is proof of value. But is it? Look at the cycle. Wake up tired, drink the caffeine, check the inbox, hit the KPIs, smile in the meeting, and repeat. You're praised not for your presence, but for your performance. Not for your truth, but your output. And the more exhausted you get, the more you're told you're doing great. That's not purpose. That's survival. These rituals weren't created to free you. They were designed to contain you. Because as long as you're tired enough to obey but alert enough to function, the system works. You won't question the meeting if your nervous system is just trying to make it to lunch. You won't ask, "What am I even building?" if you're chasing your next goal on autopilot. But deep down you feel it, that low hum of unrest, that quiet suspicion that none of this is what life is meant to be. That whisper? It's not burnout. It's breakthrough. It's the part of you that remembers. The part that can no longer tolerate performing roles that keep you small. And when you listen to it, everything starts to shift. Beneath the noise, there's always been a signal. A subtle hum. A quiet pulse. That strange feeling in your chest when everyone else seems fine and you just aren't. That pull that says, "This isn't it. This was never it." It's not a glitch. It's guidance. It's your intelligence. Your higher self. Your divinity. Tapping the glass from the inside, asking you to notice. To pause. To break the rhythm just long enough to remember who you were before the script got installed. Because the trance only works when you don't know it's a trance. And culture only holds power over you when you believe it's yours. But it's not. It was handed to you. Marketed to you. Branded and sold as just the way things are. But what if it's not? What if most of what you call normal was just inherited noise? That moment you begin to question, not with cynicism, but with clarity, is the moment the spell begins to crack. And when it does, something wild begins to surface. Something ancient. Something real. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and begin asking, "What feels true?" And in that shift, your reality rearranges. Not because you ran away, but because you finally woke up. You don't have to escape the world. You just have to wake up inside it. Awakening isn't about running off to the mountains or rejecting society. It's about becoming lucid, right here, right now, inside the dream everyone else still calls reality. But here's the catch: awakening isn't a one-time event. It's not a flash of light that fixes everything. It's a choice, a practice, a lifestyle. Most people chase the moment of clarity, the meditation high, the emotional breakthrough, the epiphany, and then fall back asleep, back into the script, back into performance, like they never saw what they saw. That moment of insight? It was just the door. The work begins after. Because awakening isn't something you visit. It's something you become. And that becoming means integration. Can you carry the truth you touched into the uncomfortable moment? Can you live your clarity in the chaos? Can you embody the God within, not just in silence, but in conflict, in confusion, in discomfort? That's the edge most never cross. They stop where embodiment begins. Because it's one thing to realize you are divine. It's another to live like it, every day, in your words, in your relationships, in your decisions. That's where awakening becomes real. Not in thought, but in being. To live from your divinity means breaking every agreement you made while you were asleep. The ones that told you to shrink, to obey, to chase approval instead of truth. The ones that wrapped you in identities that got you love, but cost you freedom. It means letting go of goals that came from fear, not alignment. It means choosing truth even when it costs comfort. It means walking into each moment without the mask. And that's not easy. Because the ego, oh, it hates this part. The ego wants to be admired. It wants applause. It wants to win at the game of appearances. But the God within you? It doesn't care about status. It doesn't care about likes or metrics or trophies. It is pure, quiet, steady, It speaks not through volume, but through vibration. And that vibration either animates your choices, or gets buried beneath them. This world doesn't need more people talking about awakening. It needs people living it, embodying it, in their work, in their homes, in their silence, in their presence, not as a performance, but as a frequency that doesn't flinch. You don't need to convince anyone. You just need to become. When you truly embody your divinity, you don't need to say a word. Your presence speaks for you, not with force, not with noise, but with coherence. People feel something shift when you enter the room. Not because you're trying to be anything, but because you've stopped pretending to be what you're not. No masks. No performance. No grasping for approval. Just truth, alive in your posture, your silence, your breath. You don't need to declare your awakening. You don't need a title or a stage. When you're aligned, it radiates. And that's what the world is starving for, not more spiritual content, but spiritual congruence. People who live what they know. People who don't just say, love is everything, but actually love when it's hard. People who don't just post about freedom, but live it with their choices. When you do this, not perfectly but honestly, you become a mirror. For some, that mirror will be uncomfortable. For others, it will be a revelation. Because your authenticity reminds people of something they buried in themselves. You're not here to preach. You're here to embody. And embodiment doesn't ask for applause. It simply is. This isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. The ego wants to appear enlightened. The soul just wants to be free. And freedom doesn't always look graceful. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's awkward. Sometimes it's telling the truth when your voice shakes. Sometimes it's walking away when staying would be easier. Embodiment isn't a polished performance, it's presence. It's speaking up when silence feels safer. It's saying no when yes would win you praise. It's being misunderstood and choosing alignment over approval. This is rebellion, not against others, but against the lie that says you have to abandon yourself to belong. Because every time you make yourself smaller to stay comfortable, you trade authenticity for survival. But you weren't born to survive. You were born to remember. To live as your unfiltered, untamed, divine self. Not just in private. Not just in your journal. But everywhere. That's the revolution. Not louder voices. Clearer presence. Not bigger platforms. Deeper roots. Because the system doesn't fear your ideas. It fears your embodiment. It fears the person who doesn't just know they are divine, but lives like it. You don't need another spiritual high. You need a spiritual spine. Not a moment of euphoria, but a foundation, steady, grounded, unshakable. One that holds you when the old life starts falling apart. When the friends drift away. When the roles no longer fit. When the comfort is gone and only truth remains. This is where most people panic. They think the discomfort means something's wrong. But it doesn't. It means something's real. Because when you stop playing roles, when you stop chasing safety and sameness, you meet what's always been waiting underneath. And you is not fragile. You is not a role or a resume. You is the awareness that holds it all. That's what the spiritual spine is made of. It's built through choice, through practice, through presence. Not when it's easy, but when it's hard. When the world tries to seduce you back into the script. When fear says, shrink. When doubt says, hide. That's when your spine holds. That's when embodiment becomes your compass. Because truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just stands. There comes a moment in every awakening where the seeker disappears. Not because they've given up, but because they finally realize they were never missing anything. What they were chasing wasn't in a temple, a retreat, or a philosophy. It was beneath every layer of distraction, every mask, every inherited belief. The truth isn't out there waiting. It's in here remembering. You stop grasping. You stop striving. You stop trying to become, and simply start being. Not as a concept, as a presence. The God within doesn't arrive with thunder. It speaks in silence, in stillness, in the space between breaths. And from that stillness, everything shifts. You don't need to fight anymore. You don't need to prove, to convince, to justify. You simply withdraw your agreement from the illusion, and it begins to crumble. Your fears don't vanish, but they stop driving. Your doubts don't disappear, but they lose their weight. You become lucid in the dream, and the dream doesn't own you anymore. You're not the actor on stage. You're the awareness in the audience, awake, steady, whole. And that's the power they can't touch. Now you're awake. Not in theory, not as a persona, but in your breath, your choices, your presence. You no longer perform for approval. You don't shrink for comfort. You don't wait for permission to live as truth. You choose relationships that honor your expansion. You eat food that honors your clarity. You speak words that honor your vibration. You protect your energy, not out of fear, but out of reverence. And most of all, you remember, not just who you are, but what you are. Not the body, not the role, not the story, but the infinite awareness expressing through form. The divine, embodied. That's not poetry. That's your reality. And no system, no rule, no illusion can take that from you. You stop waiting for the guru, for the event, for the moment, because you realize you are the moment. There's nothing left to become. There's only more to release. And when you live like this, people feel it. Not because you're louder, but because you're clearer. Your frequency becomes a mirror. Some will resist it. Others will rise to meet it. But it doesn't matter, because you're not here to convince. You're here to be. And in that being, you fulfill the deepest mission of all. To walk this earth as a living expression of the source itself. You've remembered.